We know a lot about what is 2 miles and 3 miles down. It isn't being shared with the public, but our government and probably other governments know quite a bit. The ice beneath Antarctica is more than 2 miles thick in places. But what if something down there was never meant to be frozen? What if hidden beneath that endless white desert, investigators discovered a structure so impossible, so terrifying, that military personnel were ordered to erase every trace of it from history? For over 40 years, whispers have circulated through classified circles about strange geometric formations buried deep under the Antarctic ice. Most people dismissed them as conspiracy theories until Linda Moulton Howe finally broke her silence. According to dying witnesses, Navy crews, scientists, and intelligence officers all saw the same thing, a massive, angular object unlike anything found in nature. Not ice, not rock, something engineered, something ancient. And the deeper they investigated the stranger, the story became emergency landings restricted, coordinates sudden radio blackouts, men forced to sign lifetime secrecy agreements. Some allegedly spent decades haunted by what they saw before, finally confessing everything to Linda in secret, recordings shortly before their deaths. Before we expose what investigators claim was discovered beneath Antarctica, hit like and subscribe, because some say powerful institutions never wanted these testimonies to reach the public. Now at 81 years old, Linda says she can no longer stay silent. After decades collecting classified testimonies, hidden coordinates, and deathbed confessions, she claims the truth is finally too important to bury. And if even a fraction of these witnesses were telling the truth, Antarctica may be hiding one of the greatest secrets in human history: the man on the ridge. The year was 1982. A Navy flight engineer whose name Linda has protected to this day was on a routine supply run from McMurdo Station to a remote research camp deep in the Antarctic interior. Somewhere over the ice sheet, an equipment malfunction forced the crew to set down early on an exposed ridge. Wind was hammering the fuselage. Temperatures were so low that exposed skin burns in seconds. It was the kind of place where you fix what is broken and you leave. But while the crew worked on repairs, the flight engineer looked out across the ridge and stopped. Something was wrong with the landscape. On a distant rise, shapes broke the horizon that did not belong. They were geometric, symmetrical, too regular, too angular, and too precise to be ice formations. He moved closer, close enough to see what looked like the top of a massive structure, partially exposed where wind and time had stripped the ice away. It was angular, it was solid, and it was made of something that was clearly not natural. Before he could reach it, the radio crackled. Orders: return to McMurdo immediately. No explanation, no discussion. When they landed, intelligence officers were waiting. The crew was separated, debriefed individually, and told their flight logs were now classified. They signed additional non-disclosure agreements and were given one instruction: this never happened. Now here is what you need to understand about Linda Moulton Howe. She is not a conspiracy theorist with a YouTube channel. She is an Emmy award-winning investigative journalist who has spent over 4 decades interviewing military personnel, scientists, and government officials. She built her career on documented, evidence-verified credentials and sources who could be corroborated. When the flight engineer contacted her in 1998, retired in his 70s and knowing his time was running out, she didn't rush to publish. She interviewed him for hours. She verified his service record. She confirmed his credentials. His account included specific coordinates, exact dates, and the names of other crew members on that flight. Everything checked out, but Linda knew one witness wasn't enough, so she filed his testimony away. She told no one and she waited. She had no idea what was about to start. If this is already making the hair on the back of your neck stand up, hit subscribe, because what comes next makes this look like a warm-up. The pattern over the next 20 years, they came to her one by one. Military personnel, scientists, contractors, people who had no connection to each other, who had never met, who had been stationed at different bases in different decades, all telling Linda pieces of the same impossible story. A geophysicist who had run ice-penetrating radar surveys sat across from Linda with his jaw tight and his voice barely above a whisper. He had found cavities beneath the ice. Not small pockets, but massive voids, geometrically regular, far too deep, and too structured to be natural caves. When he flagged the data, his supervisor's face went white. The readings were classified within hours. His entire team was reassigned. He never saw that data again. A Navy CB construction battalion member described being deployed to AA, classified excavation site miles from any official research station. There was no scientific briefing and no ice core. Mission just drilling straight down. And at the bottom of the shaft he saw something that made his stomach drop. Metallic structures, walls that looked manufactured, surfaces too smooth, too deliberate, and too perfect to be geological. He stared at them and thought, someone built this. A scientist from Argentina's Esperanza base told Linda that research teams occasionally pulled artifacts from ice. Quarries dated to over 12,000 years old. Every single time. Military personnel arrived, confiscated the samples and made them disappear. No logs, no reports, no published papers, gone. A pilot who flew missions across the continent described a no-fly zone that existed on none of the public charts. It was an entire restricted area where civilian flights were forbidden and military flights required clearance. Levels almost nobody had. When he asked a superior what was down, there the answer was short. Sensitive research. Stop asking. None of these people knew each other. None of them had seen Linda's other interviews, but every testimony pointed to the same conclusion. Something ancient and structured was buried beneath the Antarctic ice, and multiple governments knew about it. Linda sat with all of these accounts, spread across the desk, and felt the weight of what she was holding. This was not one story. This was a pattern she could not ignore and could not yet prove. But then someone contacted her who changed everything. The testimony that changed everything. It was 2016. Linda received a message from someone she would later describe as the most credible source she had ever interviewed in her entire career. He was a retired NORAD officer with classified clearance who had been part of an Antarctic operation in the early 2000s that does not appear in any public record. His identity is the one Linda has guarded more fiercely than any other. When he began talking, Linda went quiet, because what he described did not just add to the previous testimonies, it connected them. Every isolated account, every fragment, and every unexplained detail from 20 years of interviews suddenly locked into place like pieces of a machine clicking together. According to his account, based on what he was briefed on and what he personally witnessed beneath the West Antarctic ice sheet at a depth of approximately 2 miles, there are multiple structures of artificial origin, not geological anomalies, not ice formations, and not anything that belongs in any geology textbook. These are structures built by someone engineered with intention and precision, and they are old, far older than the ice that buried them. They predate the last ice age, meaning they were constructed when Antarctica was a green temperate continent, with rivers and forests over 12,000 years ago. Let that land for a second. Over 12,000 years. That is thousands of years before Sumer, thousands of years before the first Egyptian dynasty, before every civilization we have ever called ancient. He told Linda these structures were first detected in the 1940 ESA during Operation High Jump, the massive 1946 to 1947 Antarctic expedition led by Admiral Richard Byrd, officially. The mission was about establishing research bases and training personnel for polar conditions. The classified reality, according to this source, was something else entirely. Seismic surveys had picked up anomalies deep beneath the ice that no one could explain and no one was supposed to talk about. And here is the part that should stop you cold. Since then, for over 7 decades, the United States, Russia, and more recently China have been running covert recovery operations across Antarctica. Not research recovery, archaeological excavation, and technological retrieval conducted entirely separate from the public science programs operating under the Antarctic Treaty. The structures, he told Linda, are not small. They are not an outpost. What has been found appears to be an extensive urban complex with buildings infrastructure. and technology suggesting a civilization so advanced, it challenges every assumption we hold about human history. Some areas are accessible through natural ice caves where shifting glaciers have created openings. Others are being reached through drilling operations disguised as routine scientific research. And the technology being pulled from these structures, pay close attention to this, some of it still works. Not all of it is understood, but functional devices have been recovered and are currently being studied at classified facilities. Linda asked the question any journalist would ask, prove it. The officer provided coordinates. He provided internal documents redacted, but showing classified project designations at the exact locations he described. And he gave her names. Other personnel involved in these operations, people she could find, people she could call. But the thing Linda couldn't stop thinking about was the silence on the other end of her own mind. 20 years of scattered testimonies had just become one story, and that story was bigger than anything she had ever investigated. What she didn't know yet was that the most disturbing testimony was still coming. What they found inside a military contractor who worked a classified drilling operation in 2003 agreed to speak to Linda, but only because he was dying. His cancer was terminal, and he could not take what he had seen to the grave. He described being lowered into an ice shaft that had been drilled to access what his briefing called a geological anomaly. The descent was slow. The platform creaked under his weight as it dropped deeper into the shaft, foot by foot. The daylight above shrank to a bright coin and then to nothing. The walls were ice-white, blue-veined, and featureless. The cold was total. The only sounds were the hum of the winch and his own breathing echoing off the shaft walls. Then, over a mile down, something changed. The ice stopped. Not gradually, it ended. The walls shifted to something smooth, almost metallic. A surface with a faint sheen that caught his headlamp. A surface that had no business being a mile beneath an Antarctic ice sheet. The temperature felt different. The acoustics shifted. Even the air had a different quality, like stepping from one room into another. He stepped off the platform into a cavity that was clearly, unmistakably not natural. The space opened around him. It was enormous. There were markings on the walls, symbols and geometric patterns unlike any writing system anyone on his team had ever seen. The team stood in silence, flashlights cutting through a darkness that had not been disturbed in thousands of years. And then he saw it, set into the far wall, a doorway, not a crack, not a gap. A constructed entrance framed and deliberate leading somewhere deeper. His hands were shaking. He could feel his pulse in The team was not authorized to go further. That required a clearance level none of them held. But he watched as scientists and military personnel in specialized equipment prepared to enter. They moved with the calm efficiency of people who had done this before. He was sent back to the surface. He was paid a substantial bonus. He signed a non-disclosure agreement that threatened criminal prosecution. And he carried what he saw in silence for years, until the cancer diagnosis made secrecy feel meaningless. He told Linda, people should know we found something down there. Something that changes everything we think we know about history. Now listen to what else Linda's investigation turned up, because the testimonies didn't stop. They accelerated. A satellite imagery analyst told her he had watched certain Antarctic coordinates get digitally scrubbed from public data, not just reduced in resolution, but actively obscured, blurred, and erased. He had seen the originals before processing. Rectilinear shapes and formations that looked engineered. He sat at his desk staring at structures that should not exist, and when he raised it with supervisors, he was told those areas were under special access protocols, and it was not his concern. A material scientist who briefly analyzed samples from Antarctic recovery operations described alloys matching nothing in any known database. Corrosion resistance was off the charts. Strength-to-weight ratios that shouldn't be possible. Manufacturing signatures that current technology cannot replicate. A logistics coordinator for the NSF Antarctic program found equipment manifests that matched no known research mission. Industrial excavation tools sealed transport containers with armed military escorts and shipments routed through Department of Defense channels entirely outside scientific oversight. Every new witness added something more unsettling than the last. Symbols carved into walls that no linguist on any team could decode. Electronic equipment that went haywire near certain excavation sites, with instruments spinning and readings spiking from electromagnetic interference with no identifiable source. And then the claim that sent shockwaves through Linda's entire network. Multiple sources independently confirmed that recovered artifacts had been transported to classified U.S. facilities for reverse engineering. Not study. Reverse engineering. The picture was no longer fragmentary. It was enormous and it was screaming to be told, but telling it meant risking everything Linda had built over 40 years. The silence. By 2020, Linda had over 15 credible testimonies, verified coordinates, confirmed names and affiliations. A body of evidence that, taken together, pointed to one of the most consequential secrets in modern history. And then her sources started dying, one by one. The people who had trusted her with the most dangerous secrets of their lives were running out of time. The Navy flight engineer, the man on the ridge, the one who started all of this with a phone call in 1998, died in 2019. Linda got the news and sat with it in silence. Then the NORAD officer, her most important source, the man whose single testimony had connected 2 decades of scattered accounts into one staggering picture, died in 2022. Others were in steep decline in hospital beds, hospice care, with fading memories. And Linda, now in her 80s, understood something with brutal clarity. She was becoming the last person alive who held all of these testimonies together, the last thread connecting the witnesses to the world. That realization changed her. It did not just motivate her, it terrified her. Because if she waited any longer, 25 years of investigation, the life's work of a dozen dying men who had chosen truth over silence, would vanish gone as if none of it had ever happened. She said in a 2023 interview, "I realized that if I didn't tell this story completely, with all the details and all the sources I could responsibly name, then it would die. These men trusted me. I have a responsibility to make sure their testimonies survive." In late 2023, she began assembling what she calls the Comprehensive Antarctic Report. Every testimony, every coordinate, every operation name, every piece of evidence gathered across 25 years of investigation. And in early 2024, she released portions through earthfiles.com. She published specific coordinates, where witnesses reported exposed structures or underground access points. She shared declassified Operation High Jump documents with redacted sections hinting at objectives far beyond research stations. She presented anonymized testimony transcripts with enough credential detail to establish credibility. She compiled satellite imagery showing artificial data obscuration over the exact areas her sources identified. And she made a direct challenge. Other nations have satellites. Independent researchers have ice-penetrating radar. Scientists work on that continent every single day. If these testimonies are true, the evidence is there. She told the world where to look. Now here is the part that keeps me up at night. The response from every implicated government was identical. Total absolute silence. No denials, no corrections, no lawsuits, no charges, no official statement of any kind. Nothing. Just silence so complete it felt deliberate. Because it was. Think about that. An Emmy Award-winning journalist publicly accuses multiple world governments of running a 70-year cover-up involving ancient structures and recovered technology beneath Antarctic ice. And not a single government says a word. Not one denial. Not one press release calling it fiction. Linda says that silence is the loudest confirmation she could have received. If she were lying, discrediting her would be easy. A single official statement would end it. But addressing her investigation forces a choice no government wants to make. to either confirm what she is revealing or explain why dozens of credible military and scientific personnel are all independently fabricating the same story. So they say nothing, and the silence grows louder. Independent researchers started digging. Amateur satellite analysts examined her coordinates and reported anomalies. Scientists submitted requests for historical radar data from the areas she identified. Most requests were denied, classified as national security material for geological data from a continent supposedly dedicated to peaceful scientific research. One former Antarctic station worker came forward publicly to back Linda's claims, stating what anyone who has worked on that continent for extended periods already knows. There are areas you do not go, questions you do not ask, and classified military operations that have nothing to do with science happening right alongside the research programs the public sees. The implications. What makes this story so unsettling is not just the idea of something hidden beneath Antarctica, but what it could mean for everything we think we know about human history. If even part of these claims are true, it would suggest that an advanced civilization may have existed more than 12,000 years ago, long before ancient Egypt, Sumer, or any civilization we learn about in history books. That would completely change the timeline of human development. Instead of civilizations slowly progressing step by step, it could mean that knowledge once existed was lost in some ancient catastrophe and is only now being rediscovered in secret. According to Linda Moulton Howe, this is exactly why so many witnesses eventually came forward. Many of them were military personnel, scientists, contractors, and intelligence officials who claimed they saw strange structures, unexplained technology, or classified operations connected to Antarctica. Most stayed silent for decades because they feared losing their careers, breaking security agreements, or simply being ridiculed. But as they grew older, many reportedly felt they could no longer keep the secret to themselves. Linda says she spent years carefully documenting every testimony, recording interviews, collecting evidence, and verifying the backgrounds of the people who contacted her. Now, at 81 years old, she is working on a full documentary that will present all of the testimonies together for the first time. She has also placed copies of her investigation, including information from witnesses who gave permission to be identified after death with multiple institutions. Her goal is to make sure the material survives no matter what happens to her. What makes her message powerful is that she is not demanding blind belief. She openly tells people to examine the testimonies themselves and decide what they think. In her words, these were real people with real experience and professional backgrounds, not anonymous internet rumors. And if even some of their stories are true, then the world may be far stranger than most of us realize. Most of the witnesses are gone now, but their accounts remain recorded and preserved. Linda believes she made a promise to them, and after decades of silence, she finally decided to share what they told her. But the biggest question still remains. If governments truly knew about mysterious structures beneath Antarctica for decades, why keep it secret? And if discoveries connected to an ancient lost civilization were being studied behind closed doors, what else could be hidden from the public? That question is what keeps people fascinated by this mystery. Because whether the claims are true, exaggerated, or misunderstood, the idea that history might not be as complete as we think continues to capture the imagination of millions around the world. If you enjoyed this story, subscribe and share it with someone who loves mysteries, hidden history, and unexplained discoveries.